Welcome to the Cut for Time podcast. I'm Eric Stearns, joined by Pastor Clay, and this week we're going to talk about the passage from Matthew that discusses the woman with hemorrhages and Jairus and his daughter who is dead, and how Jesus brought her back to life. And we'll go ahead and get rolling. What exactly did that mean? Like the Great Commotion and all of that? Like, what happened then? It seems crazy.
It does. It does seem crazy. In that day, at that time, mourning was a very communal activity. Mm-hmm. Your entire community surrounded you, the family that was going through the death of someone. And so in this case, it's Jairus' daughter. And so by the time Jairus comes to Jesus, the daughter is dead. And then by the time Jesus gets to the house with Jairus, because there was this whole interruption with the hemorrhaging woman stopping and touching Jesus and kind of halting the whole process of Jesus getting to Jairus' house. By the time that Jesus gets there, the crowds had assembled to do this mourning work, to do the traditional things that happened during the mourning period. One of those things was that there would just be loud yelling. That was just part of the mourning process, was the community getting together on behalf of this family, letting them get their shrieks and their yells out, but also yelling alongside of them. And then also another tradition was that funerals were accompanied by flute. And so when Scripture tells us that the flute players had assembled, it seems weird and out of place to our ears because that's not how funerals work in our culture and in our time. But in that meant something very specific to the original readers of the Gospel of Matthew and to the crowds that were following Jesus. Like, there was a funeral about to happen because this girl was dead. And Jesus says to the crowd and to Jairus and to his family, the girl is not dead, she's only sleeping. Mm-hmm. And Scripture makes no bones about the fact that they laughed at him. They laughed at Jesus because that's the most ridiculous thing that they've ever heard. Like, they were in the midst of the communal act of mourning. I'm sure that at the time Jesus got there, Jairus may have come with his garments rent because that's how the family mourned. They mourned by tearing their garments. And one of the commentaries I read this week from Don Hagner in the Word Biblical Commentary talked about how for a woman to mourn, there was a very specific way of doing that they would tear the clothes that was over their chest area. And they had to wear their robes backwards then, because otherwise they would be exposed to God and everybody, which is not what you want to have happen when you're mourning. And so if you ever saw a woman with a tear on the back of her clothing, you knew that she was in the mourning process.
Really?
And so there would have been rent clothing, there would have been loud noises, there would have been flutes tuning up and getting ready to play, and the funeral was on at that point. And so for Jesus to show up and say, she's not actually dead, what you're doing is not appropriate for right now, was just lunacy to them.
Interesting. So we were reading this passage again tonight for our home huddle.
Nice.
And we were reading out of the Message, which we've kind of talked about is a little bit different before.
Yep.
But that's why he would have written in there, they were assembling to bring casseroles, I think is how the Message puts it. And that makes a lot more sense now. I'm like, pretty sure that wasn't a thing then.
Nope. No, not so much.
But it totally says casseroles in the Message.
We can totally have a side podcast on just the random ways that Eugene Peterson chose to render things in the Message.
But I suppose what he's trying to paint is that people were already bringing, we're gathering. I mean, for our day and age.
Absolutely. That's definitely, that's our custom now. Mm-hmm. And it's not just upper Midwestern folk, it's everybody. When someone dies, you bring them food to kind of lessen the burden of having to think about what are we going to cook for all these people that are showing up.
Okay, so Jesus shows up and tells this girl to, takes her by the hand and tells her to get up and walk. We've talked about this quite a bit. What would that have been like?
Right.
That would have just been unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's a reason why that passage ends with the words that the word about Jesus spread in that area, because that's the only time that someone rises from the dead. Like there's no Lazarus story in Matthew's gospel. And so that is the most amazing thing that, I mean, Jesus did a lot of amazing stuff. Obviously the whole gospel of Matthew is written from a Jewish perspective of wanting people to believe that he is the Messiah, the one sent by God. And that's why you'll read a lot of the fulfillment stuff in Matthew's gospel, that he does something, and then Matthew has this aside that says this was done to fulfill these words from the prophet. And so like for him to be the one to bring someone back from the dead, like that's not something that happened. That was beyond, that was beyond reason for them. But yet Jesus did it.
Yeah, he's on his way, and this woman with hemorrhages touches his jacket.
Right.
We kind of, we didn't gloss over that, but even the passage itself kind of glosses over that a little bit.
It's a very short telling of it. In Mark's gospel, that story is quite lengthy. In all three gospels, it's presented in the same way. So this series of events happened in the same way, that Jairus comes to Jesus and says that my daughter has died. I need you to do something. As they're traveling, this woman reaches out and touches Jesus' robe, and then they get to Jairus' house, and then the healing happens. And so that's true in all three gospels that have the telling of this story. But in Mark's, it's much longer. The conversation's much longer. There's more details. There's more of her own commentary. But Matthew, for whatever reason, shortens it to, basically this woman decided to touch Jesus. Like she knew that she was having these hemorrhages. She knew in faith that this would heal her, and she stopped at nothing to make sure it happened. And that's basically all we know. Like we don't know her name. We don't know, whatever. We don't know what happened next. We just know that she was healed by this, and that Jesus said, "Your faith made you well." And then they go back to tell the rest of the Jairus story, or the Jairus' daughter story. So,
I mean, she was really at the end of her rope.
Absolutely.
And for her, she had no other hope, and this was kind of her last ditch effort.
Right, pretty much.
In a way.
Yeah.
And the other day we read for our home huddle the story of the man at the pool, and he was there for 30 years or whatever it was.
Yep.
And Jesus told him to get up and walk from there, and kind of the same. What I remember was he kind of didn't believe him at first, and then got up and walked and told people.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
It's the same way for us. So Jairus, who was Jairus?
Jairus would have been a synagogue leader, so a very fine and upstanding person. He would have been someone that, like I said on Sunday, that viewed Jesus as a heretic. And so like for him to come to Jesus means that he was at the like the woman with the hemorrhage was at the end of his rope. Like he wanted something to happen and did not know how else to make it happen, but to come and talk to the one person that, they think he's a heretic. They don't think that the things that he's doing are of God. They think that they are absolutely demonic as a power source. And so for him to come to Jesus is a striking thing. Just how we have seen over the last couple of weeks with the healing stories of Jesus being the most gracious and the most compassionate to those that, had no other hope. That's why I think Jairus' story is told in all three Gospels. So
It's it's like you said in the message, it's kind of similar to the soldier, or the centurion and the slave. In a couple weeks ago, last week, whenever that was. It's a very similar story. So it's it's almost interesting that they bring in, a very similar story up for a second time. So there's obviously a reason to tell this a second time, essentially.
Right. Yeah. To really drive home the point, like there is nothing beyond Jesus healing. Like the centurion and the servant story is so interesting because the servant isn't there. Like the rest of the stories that we've heard thus far, Jesus has been present. Jesus has laid hands on the people to accomplish the healing. The centurion and the servant is something entirely so different because this centurion isn't from a Hebrew background. like has no other reason to believe in Jesus other than the things that he has heard, but he apparently believes enough in Jesus' sight that Jesus heals his servant. He says, this will be done according to your faith. And even though the servant is not present for the story, we are told that the account says that in that same hour, the servant was healed. And so that's already kind of like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
The power of Jesus, the power of God working through Jesus is nothing to be trifled with and is to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But take that a step further. Here's a similar story, but the healing's even greater because she is literal dead. Like she is dead. Like I said, there's the morning commotion has started. The flutes have started playing. She is dead. We are at the funeral, and Jesus comes, and Jesus dismisses the crowds, and Jesus breaks the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Dead people stay dead. That's what happens. Like our bodies have that physical capability to die. And Jesus said no.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said no because of the faith of Jairus. This girl is going to walk again. This girl is not dead. She is just sleeping. And despite the ridicule from the crowd and everything else, Jesus leads her out and she is alive. So Jesus can heal even death. Which we'll come back to. We'll get there,
Mm-hmm.
So
Probably sometime around Easter.
yeah, pretty close to
Probably around
Easter.
there.
Well, Good Friday, in fact, we'll be digging into that story a little bit more.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, little foretelling there.
exactly,
Mhm.
a plug, if you will. So Good Friday, April 2nd, 7:00 here at the church.
Be here.
So
Okay. So why did Jesus dismiss the crowds? Like, why didn't he want to do this in front of everyone?
part of it may have been their derision. I mean, we have seen in other places where there wasn't enough faith in the area for Jesus to do the healings he was supposed to do, or that he could have done.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are told in the Gospels and in different spots when he's in Nazareth, when he's in his hometown, he's not able to perform the miracles that he is usually able to because the faith of the unbelief of the people around him has a dampening effect upon the work that he's able to do. And so I think that the derision from the crowds and the fact that they didn't believe that Jesus was able to do this. Like last week with the blind folks, Jesus asks them, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" And they say, "Yes, Lord, we believe." And then they receive their sight after Jesus' touch. I don't know why that is why it is, but I just know that there is an element where the unbelief of those around Jesus affects his divine ability to do the work of healing that he is able to do. And so I think that he had to dismiss the crowds because it would have been a deterrent from him being able to do the things that he's supposed to do. So
It's fascinating.
yeah, Jesus is cool. I like studying him.
No way.
I know, right? Weird.
It's a shocker.
I know.
Uh-huh.
Funny how that works out.
I don't even know where to go. That's really interesting. Because I noticed that piece. Like, I don't understand this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would think you would want the people there to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
To actually witness what
Yep.
just happened.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But then, I mean, there's enough happening that they get the message, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, them seeing the girl walk forth from the house is enough for word to spread about what Jesus is doing in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And then that leads to the encounter with the blind guys, with the blind men. So,
And could it just be as simple as he just needed quiet,
could be. There was a commotion going on.
Right. So
yeah.
he needed to just focus.
Uh-huh.
Get rid of these loud
Could be.
people. They're annoying.
Yep.
Let me do my job.
So one of the milestones that we hit in the midst of the pandemic and in the midst of life and stuff is that we hit the 1 year mark from when everything started to change and shut down. I was strolling through my Facebook memories on the On This Day section on Facebook a couple days ago, and like it was the video that I made the day that we canceled worship for those 2 weeks, for the initial 2 weeks of the pandemic that we all thought this was just going to be. And so I just want to know, Eric, since I wasn't here and I wasn't around. So March 15th hits, the world changes. Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, cancels some games for the first time. The NCAA,
Mid-game.
what's that?
Mid-game at
Yeah.
halftime.
Yep. Yeah. So the NCAA cancels the tournament. And so that day happens. And so what did that look like for you? Like, what was different for you as a result of that stuff?
Well, it ruined the next 3 weeks of my life because all of a sudden I don't have basketball to watch.
Well,
You know,
there's that.
because the March Madness is no longer going on. My life shouldn't hinge around basketball, but man, those 3 weeks it kind of does.
Look forward to that. Yeah, it's definitely a thing.
My wife would prefer I not, but come Friday, that's what we're going to be watching.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there was that. I mean, it was so crazy because all of a sudden, boom. I mean, they had just gotten done with the Summer League tournament in Sioux Falls.
Yep.
And then boom, all of a sudden, oh, we're not playing the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
Like this is a staple for this time of
Yeah,
year.
it was madness. Like,
And-
trying to be not trying to be punny by saying that because you
Right.
March Madness, but like it was truly. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, and so there was that piece. There was, everyone has no clue what's going on. I mean, and still, I kind of feel like today we still don't have a clue what's
Well,
going on
yeah,
in some ways. But anyway, we know a whole lot more today than we did then.
right.
I thought, shoot, 2 weeks from now we'll be back to normal, no big deal.
Yep.
We'll kind of laugh about these last 2 weeks, like why did we do what we did, all that kind of stuff. But it'll be quick, be over with, and then it was a year.
Yeah,
Like that's completely different, and so like at work, like as you know, I'm pretty laid back about this whole thing. I have been the whole time. So Jenna and I, we didn't get it,
sure.
and all of a sudden we go and go to restaurants. Like I'm pretty sure we were probably planning to go on a date that weekend, but all of a sudden we weren't doing that anymore. But we've always wanted to be respectful of everyone else's feelings throughout this whole thing, and
Sure.
so if that's how people felt and didn't want to be with us, or whatever, that was fine, and the other thing too was Oliver was born March 25th.
Right. Yeah. Oh wow.
And so we actually, because during that whole process, we were hearing rumors that the husbands weren't going to be able to be in the delivery room for the baby. And we're like, oh crap, that's not what we want.
Right. Yeah.
And so we actually he was actually due March 30th. And so we decided, hey, let's go in now or as soon as we can to go a week early. And then I'll be able to be there.
right.
And so that was actually kind of interesting too, because
Wow, I didn't think about that.
no one could be there afterwards. It was just the two of us, which honestly was fantastic because for 3 days it was just the three of us. We got to spend a few days with just him. And so I sat on the couch while Jenna would be feeding him, watching 30 for 30s.
Sure.
For 2 straight days. It was fantastic. I had planned I was going to be watching basketball, but that didn't happen.
Right.
So I replaced it with something else. Yeah. But anyway, I'd buzz out and I'd pick up because at that point they were still, it wasn't dining rooms weren't open, but you still do drive through and stuff.
Sure.
And so I'd buzz out and get some chickens or something and bring it back to the hospital. So that was actually kind of fun. Mm-hmm. But I mean, from then on, we didn't see anyone for the longest time. Like there's people in this church who just met Oliver for the first time.
Wow.
And stuff like that. And that hit me.
Wow.
2 Sundays ago, an older couple that I grew up as, kind of second grandparents for me.
Yep.
Just met him for the first time a couple weeks ago, and that just kind of hit me. Like, this has been harder on me than I thought it has been. And just because I'm a pretty social guy.
Sure.
And so then there's that piece. There's we didn't do any family stuff for the longest time. We had to hold off on having Oliver's baptism.
Sure.
Until we were back in this building.
Yep.
And so we did that end of May. We did that.
Okay.
And so that was different. By the middle of the summer, we kind of said, we kind of understand the risks that we're taking at this point. We're going to kind of go back to normal and,
Sure.
Still distance ourselves from older people. But from that point on, we just kind of, we balanced our own risks and went from there. At work, it was kind of interesting. We're pretty isolated to begin with because most of us we all have our own offices.
Sure.
And so for me, because I can't be productive at home, working from home, probably half the DGR staff worked from home for probably 2 months.
Sure.
From about March 15th to about June 1st, I would say, is when people really started to roll back in.
Sure.
But there was no more in-person meetings. Everything went online. My brother Jared is just going back to the office now.
Oh, wow.
And he's been off essentially a year. But it's just a whole different work dynamic too, because being an engineer, we always work in teams.
Sure.
We've got a project team that we're working with to get a project done well. Instead of buzzing into their office, all the time, we were doing it through chat, through email, and through all this stuff. And there is a disconnect with not being able to sit down across the desk from someone and have those conversations.
Yep, absolutely.
No matter how well you type
and
can write an email or a message or talk on the phone, there is still a disconnect to being able to point to a piece of paper or point to the computer screen and be able to get across what you want to get across.
Yep.
And that, during that period was a struggle. Now, DGR as a staff, I don't know if maybe half the people in our office have had it by now. We've handled it really well. We've never shut down, never had a big outbreak or anything in the office.
Yeah,
and so
nice.
But it was a whole different animal there for a while. At this point, we're just starting to get back into having in-person meetings. I'll still, by about, midsummer, we were going back to, if the client was comfortable, we'd go meet with them in person.
Okay.
In the break room, have masks on and do all the other stuff.
Yep.
But now we're just starting to have big meetings as a company, internally and stuff like that.
Wow.
And so it's been a year. I mean, you think about how long it's been of not doing those things.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy.
Yep.
So yeah, I think the hardest thing for me though has been there have been people who have not met Oliver. Like my grandparents haven't met Oliver yet.
Wow.
And we used to see them all the time.
Sure.
Yep. And yeah, they haven't met him yet. And so that's probably been the hardest thing
so
for me.
That's so hard. Yeah.
But
I can imagine that. Wow.
But yeah, it's been an interesting year. How about for you?
Yeah.
How did the last year look for you outside of moving?
When this all started, I was still serving in Burke and Heretic. I had the two churches in South Central South Dakota, and we got our first piece of advisement from Bishop O's office. Shortly thereafter, March 15th was our last normal service. And even then it wasn't very normal because 2 days before this was starting to, the word about coronavirus was starting to get around, and we just didn't know what to do at all. And so we decided in Burke specifically, we had church in Heretic. We didn't have, we just said, if you don't feel comfortable coming, that's great. If you do, that's awesome. We're going to have hand sanitizer available. We're going to do everything that we can to be as safe as possible. We were still singing at that point. So that was Heretic Church. Over in Burke, I was already recording the sermon in Burke just off I had a rickety old tripod and a cell phone, and I recorded just the sermon in Burke. But then that March 15th was the first day that we chose to live stream the entire worship service because we were worshiping around 55 to 60 people in Burke, and that day we had 20. And it was just drastic, and it was immediate that people were not comfortable being in large gatherings because that's what we were told not to do. We got the recommendation from Bishop O to suspend in-person worship for 2 weeks. So it was in March 29th and then the first week of April, which was right on the verge of Holy Week. There was still, even with that first piece from Bishop O, there was still hope of in-person Easter services. Maybe not in-person Holy Week, but not in-person Easter services. And so I mentally prepared myself to cancel worship for 2 weeks. And I remember saying to Lindsay that I am not prepared mentally or spiritually to not have my last Easter with these people. because I had already been reappointed to Canton. We already knew that I was moving. There was a while there afterwards that we were like, okay, what are they going to do with pastors that are moving right now? Because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So what do we do with that? Obviously, they still had us all move and start new positions and new appointments and just figure it out. But back to those first couple of weeks, like, we didn't know what exactly to do. We knew that we knew how to live stream with a cell phone and stuff. And so we did that. So that's all we had for a while. So we decided to just live stream worship from the Burke Church because they had a sound system that we could move, and we had all the infrastructure there already to do that. And so for 2 weeks we just did live stream worship in Burke. We had my tripod. We kind of moved around our sanctuary. We moved things onto the chancel that needed to be there. We moved things off the chancel that didn't need to be there. We kind of turned the sanctuary into a streaming studio, basically. And we set up a kind of a command center at the front of the sanctuary, because the aisle is exactly 6 feet wide, and so a 6-foot table can fit just right there. And we just did our best. I had a family commit to being there with me. That we were able to, we set things up so we were able to distance enough that we felt comfortable. But we had a dedicated piano player, and her husband ran our tech for us. So we were live. We were on. We were there. And so that was how we operated for a couple weeks. And then right before Holy Week was supposed to start, we got the word from Bishop O to suspend in-person worship beyond Easter. And that broke me. And so it was just a lot of frantic conversations, group chats with other pastors, Zoom calls of being like, okay, what do we do now? I mean, that's the strength of leaning on my colleagues and helping us all think through it together is what really sustained me and them in those early days of the pandemic, because we were all figuring out how to do ministry now in very different situations of not being able to just be in our building and with our people and doing the normal stuff. It all looked different. We did 12 weeks of drive-in worship services, and then we went back to the building for my last 3 weeks there. And on our first day back to in-person worship, I ordered confetti poppers off of Oriental Trading. And so we did the benediction. I said, welcome back to worship. And then we shot off confetti poppers. It was really kind of a fun thing to do. They were more like ribbons and streamers rather than like actual confetti, because no one wants to clean that up. Right. So, and that was what we had to do work-wise. Family-wise, it was just very, it was very weird and different. My wife is a teacher, and at the time she was teaching 5th grade, and they were on spring break, and they just had to adjust, and it was just immediate that they had to adjust. The Gregory School gave all the teachers enough autonomy to just do whatever they had to do to get through it. And so my wife had already been through and done certifications in Google Classroom, and so everything just got moved to Google Classroom for her. She did a Google Hangout with her class twice a week. She did different fun things, helped with whatever work that they needed help with, but everything was on Google Classroom for her and for her class. The hardship was that this Gregory School decided to only send laptops home with grades 6 through 12, and my wife taught 5th, and so her kids had to rely on their own devices, and if not, they had to do paper packets, and so my wife had to do both online and paper for all of her students, no matter what. And that got to be challenging. That got to be pretty hard. So, and then we moved, and then we got here, and you all had been back to in-person worship sooner than we were. And so it was just kind of, navigating how I meet people, and it was navigating, everybody has a different comfort level with this. And so there were some people that I am now just meeting. I've gotten to know people from the nose up because of masks, and there are some people that, want to hang out at a restaurant with us. And then there are some people that, a phone call is fine, is as willing as there is as much contact as they want right now. Right. And trying to navigate who wants what and who needs what is something very hard to do. So, and it's still a challenge, trying to figure out who's comfortable with what and and how we do the most effective and God-honoring ministry in the midst of all of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to get very creative very fast in the midst of ministry. And that's what a lot of people had to do. There was this initial burst of innovation and creativity. I mean, like you mentioned with your team at work, like everything got different and still was done effectively enough, if that makes sense.
It was the birth of Zoom. Like you said, we had to get creative, but a lot of those creative things, have led to something that we'll use, moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like Zoom and Teams and all those kind of things. Or there was something I was thinking about the other day, and like, not everything that's come out of this has been bad. There's been things that we've developed through this last year that we can then take forward and use in the future. Yep. Or cut out the fat, for lack of a better term. Yep. Like all of a sudden we realize we don't need to do some things. That's it's been a positive, even though most of this has been bad.
Right. Yeah.
It's
been
not
all
something
very frustrating and all, there's a reason why we're focusing this Lenten season on the things that have been broken. And so like that, and the thing that we talked about being broken over this last week with the message on Sunday was just that idea of creativity and that idea of innovation. And so like like I said, there was this initial burst of creativity at the start of this thing. There was this initial innovation. We all found different ways to occupy time if we had time to occupy. If being at work was no longer an option for us, or if working was no longer an option, if people were laid off or furloughed, they had to do something with their time. And so there was this, this renaissance of, we're going to learn how to bake bread, or we're going to learn how to, crochet and knit, and we're going to learn how to, like I said on Sunday, there was a friend of mine named Josh, who's the husband of one of my best friends from college. She's a pastor in Kokomo, Indiana, and like they're on the verge of starting a restaurant because he learned how to make ramen, like good Japanese fancy, like not like cup of noodles, but like ramen. What happened was we got tired of being innovative. We got tired of having to do things differently. And so like I mentioned on Sunday, I took this BuzzFeed quiz, and the thing that got revealed to me through that was that the only thing that we're still doing that we were doing at the start of the pandemic is watching content on our favorite streaming services. Like we got tired of those initial things because this has drug on for so long, and we've had to be doing things differently for so long that we just kind of stopped doing certain things that just took up brain space that we couldn't dedicate to it anymore. And so now, and so that's why we talked about that on Sunday, is the fact that has been broken by the pandemic. And so the bridge for that, to me, to the stories of Scripture, is that in these stories, there was such innovation and creativity that led to healing. That, Jairus, like I mentioned at the start of the conversation that we had, Jairus is the last person that should have been reaching out to Jesus, but yet he did. Like he oversaw all of his hang-ups about coming to Jesus. He didn't believe that the things that Jesus was doing were right until he needed them. And being willing to take that step takes innovative spirit. And being willing to justify that to his friends that would now view him in that light of, blood traitor, had to take some creativity. The woman with the hemorrhage had to, navigate a world where she was not supposed to be in public. Like her bleeding condition left her perpetually unclean in the eyes of her religion. And so and because she was unclean, she was thus unwelcome in a lot of public life. It's the same thing that we saw with the lepers. But she didn't care. She knew that getting to Jesus would lead to her healing. And so she made it happen. She very creatively came up with this idea. I don't need to bug Jesus that much. I need to bug Jesus enough that I can touch him. That's all I need to do. Because word about Jesus has been spreading in my area. I just need to touch him some way. And so she navigated that crowd. She broke out of the mold of what she was supposed to do and thought creatively and thought innovatively to reach out and touch Jesus, and it changed everything. For Jairus, for the woman, for the community that was there to mourn, that mourning was turned into dancing, and mourning was turned into rejoicing because they were willing to take those creative steps to get to Jesus.
With all of these stories, it just goes back to Jesus isn't just for this set person.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's not just for the person who's grown up. In today's time, not just for the person who's grown up in the church his whole life.
Absolutely.
He's for the person who doesn't feel like they belong anywhere. He's for the person who doesn't feel like, or has been a part of something else their whole, something that's contradictory to Christianity.
Right.
Their whole life.
Yep.
He's there for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's the one conclusion from this story. That was the one conclusion I keep going back to is, it doesn't matter who you are.
No.
Like, in all of this, it doesn't matter, the things that you've been doing for the last year. I mean, there's hope that Jesus will take care of this at the end. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so you can keep doing those things. You can pass the time because at some point Jesus is going to take care of this. Yeah.
There will be some great day when we're told that this is all over. And maybe we're getting there faster than we think. Mm-hmm. And that's just some good news because I know I'm tired.
Yeah.
I know I'm tired. And I've still been able to work this entire time. I've been able to basically change jobs this entire time and not face the strain that other people have been facing. I get that I'm in a place of privilege or of advantage or whatever you want to talk about, or however you want to talk about it. I haven't had to struggle the way that others have had to struggle.
Mm-hmm. Same here.
Yeah.
I mean, I have more work, honestly, because of or just as much work through this whole thing as I did before. Mm-hmm. And I haven't had to struggle, but imagining being one of those people, and it still sucked for me, and it still sucked for you. Or being one of those people who have been locked in their houses and not being able to do the things, anything, really. Yeah. Yep. There's got to be hope for them.
There is. I mean, what we're attesting to here in this story, in this sermon series, is that there's a larger hope named Jesus, and that he is our ultimate. Like I said on Sunday, these two people from very different backgrounds found Jesus to be their last and found Jesus to be their best hope. Mm-hmm. And let that be for all of us, So
what do you have in store for next week?
But we're going to be talking about the story of Jesus and the storm, of Jesus calming the storm for the disciples. So the disciples are afraid that they're on the verge of death. Jesus is chilling in the stern, sleeping, having a good time, taking a nap, doing Jesus things. Mm-hmm. And the disciples say, don't you care that we're dying? This is kind of serious, dude. Wake up, please, and fix it. And Jesus does. And so we're talking about a little bit about how just, the world is broken, basically, that our creation is broken, that, we're going to be kind of pivoting into Paul a little bit more than I have been in the last couple of weeks, but there's a phrase in Romans that the whole earth is groaning for the redemptive work of God. And so our whole earth is groaning for the redemptive work of God. This thing is broken. And so we're going to be focusing on how that there's a role for us to play in that, and that there's work for us to do to bring about healing, but ultimately, again, putting our ultimate hope and finding our ultimate hope in Jesus. And
that sounds great.
That's the direction we're heading.
Mm-hmm. What do we got? 2 more weeks?
2 more weeks. So, because we'll deal with the story of the storm on Sunday, and then the week after that is Palm Sunday, and then the week after that is Easter. So,
very good. Well, join us again next week for the Sunday message at 10 o'clock here at the church, or online, or on the podcast by Monday. So join us. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next week.